August is Women in Translation Month, otherwise known as WITMonth. This is a month where we focus on and celebrate the women in translation from around the world whose works have been translated into English by a translator of any gender. What's important is that the authors that we talk about here are all women and that their works were originally written in a language that is not English. I've picked 13 modern books from 13 different countries, all by women in translation. If you like the sound of any of these, read them for WITMonth. If not, I have so many more recommendations on our website and on this channel. Women in Translation Month and women in translation in general is a very, very big deal to us, and it should be a very big deal to everyone. Let's check out some amazing works by women in translation. Happy WITMonth. We're going to start with one of my favorite works of science fiction, a Chinese novel called Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang. This was translated by Ken Liu, who translates, I think, every piece of Chinese science fiction ever. Vagabonds is a Chinese sci-fi novel set about 200 years from now when we have colonized Mars. But Earth and Mars are politically and economically very, very different spaces. There has been a war between Earth and Mars, and now they are kind of at peace. Mars represents a communist utopia, while Earth represents the very furthest point that capitalism could reach. And our protagonist is a young Martian who has spent her teenage years living on Earth as a kind of a delegate, and now she's back on Mars. And so she, in some ways, is a person of two cultures. Vagabonds is a political saga that explores the different ways that we live and experience the society around us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I love this book. It's pretty long, it's pretty dense, and it is very, very fulfilling. It's not really out to tell you what is right politically or economically, but rather just explore the different ways that we can live and the different ways that society can function. And it does so really brilliantly. I talk a lot on this channel and blog about Japanese literature, and I wanted to pick a Japanese novel that I don't talk about that often. This is There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura, translated by Polly Barton, who is just a fantastic translator. There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job is a book that I really, really enjoyed, but I just don't bring up very often. It tells the story of a young Japanese woman who has gone from job to job. Throughout the novel, we see her take on 5 very, very different jobs. Originally, she quit a very oppressive job that ground her down, had her working too many hours, and she was ready to burn out. She did burn out. Now she's after an easy job, an easier life, and she's finding that impossible. Partially because an easy job isn't really what she's after. Because we want our jobs to be fulfilling. We want to feel like what we do is meaningful, but we also want to be respected. We want our time and our labor to be respected. And it's really, really hard to balance those two things in a capitalistic system. I used to be a school teacher, and I felt that my work mattered, but my time and my labor was not respected. And I think a lot of teachers, at least in the UK, would agree with that. And so I really, really felt myself attached to what our protagonist and her situation involves. This is quite a chill novel. Not a lot happens in it. You just watch the protagonist go from job to job. But every job is different. Every job offers something new for her to learn, people to meet, strange experiences, and it is often quite funny. But watching her go from crisis to crisis, and these crises all being different things, is very, very interesting, and it will hit hard if you've ever tried to strike that balance between a fulfilling job and a job that is also easy, pays well, does everything that you expect a job to do. It's brilliantly satisfying. This next book is from Chile. It's called Theatre of War by Andrea Yeftanovic. It was translated from the Spanish by Francis Riddle, and it is a very unique and slender little thing. It was published in the UK by Charco Press, who I will take any opportunity to scream about because they are one of our most important publishers. Theatre of War tells the story of a family. The parents of this family escaped to Chile from somewhere in Europe, somewhere where there was a war. I think a civil war, but the war has come with them, in their minds, in their feelings. They are traumatized, they are tortured, they cannot let the war go. And it influences and impacts the ways in which they live their lives, raise their kids, And the novel is framed as a play. There is a sort of framing device that's used where our characters are on stage narrating and talking and experiencing things as if they are talking to an auditorium. So Theatre of War is the perfect title for what you're getting here. This is a book that examines the impact of war through generations and generational trauma, generational impact, the ways in which parents raise their children based on their own experiences, and that is often not a good thing. It is very difficult to raise a child as a perfect person because you are human and you are bringing your own experiences into this, and you will be emotionally affected by your children and you will negatively impact their lives. I think a lot about parenting these days because I'm at that age where people have kids and I don't want my own. I think about parents and parenting a lot, and this book really, really explores that, but in a very strong and traumatic sense because these characters have come from a war-torn nation. These are not just people with their own personal traumas, these are people who have survived and escaped warfare. So it's still looking at parenting and the damage that it can do, but in a very, very extreme case. And it's brilliant, and that theatrical framing device makes it quite entertaining and engrossing. This next novel is from Poland, and it is by Olga Tokarczuk, who is the winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. She is the winner of the Booker Prize. She is an internationally celebrated author, and for very good reason. Trying to pick one book of hers was tough, but I settled on Flights, because Flights is my favourite novel of hers. And it's the one that won the Booker Prize. Flights was translated by Jennifer Croft, who is a genius translator. I mean, she is quite literally a genius human being. Flights is a very intriguing book. At the time when I read it, I was a digital nomad moving from place to place, and so it hit me really, really hard because it's about being a nomad. Flights has one central protagonist, a woman who moves from place to place and muses very philosophically and poetically on the notion of movement, of migration, of nomadism. She discusses what it's like to move, to be fluid, to be always in motion. It's beautiful. It is so romantic. But it's also a very experimental and kind of surreal book because although she is our central protagonist, we often then move into the minds and stories of real historical people that have some thematic connection to what's going on in Flights. For example, I think the most trippy moment perhaps is a chapter that follows Chopin's heart. After Chopin died, his heart is transported from Paris to Poland, and we follow it on its journey to get there. This is a book that explores the concept of migration, and how our hearts move, and our minds, and how we move other people, and how we move their hearts and their minds. It's stunning, it's beautiful, it's reflective, it's haunting, and not many books hit you like Flights does. Quite a few of the books on this list are translated from Spanish, but they're all from different Spanish-speaking countries, and this is Here Be Icebergs. This is a short story collection by Katja Adawi, translated from Spanish by Rosalind Harvey. Katja Adawi is a Peruvian author, and Here Be Icebergs is a very satisfying short story collection that looks at family through a lot of different lenses. It looks at the ways that families torment each other, support and love each other, screw each other up, make mistakes. It looks at found families as well as biological blood families. It looks at how we can really screw up or support each other within a found family, a close friendship dynamic. What made this book stand out for me is the fact that it very, very cleverly plays around with structure. Just like a dream, a lot of the stories begin in the middle. There is no introduction to a lot of the stories. You just begin where you need to begin, and there might be occasional flashes back that fill in the blanks a little bit. But they will be contextual as the characters bring up the past or just think back to things that they've just been reminded of. The way that the stories are structured feels very true to life. These are such grounded tales about real things that happen to real people every single day within families. They could easily be true, overheard conversations. The realism here is heavy and weighted and beautiful. Another Spanish language novel is from Argentina This is a book by my favorite Argentinian author. It is my favorite book by her, and by that token, it is my favorite Argentinian novel. This is The Wind That Lays Waste by Selva Almada, translated by Chris Andrews. I cannot express how much I love this novel. It is one of my favorites of all time, and honestly, if there's one book on this whole list that I want you to read, it's The Wind That Lays Waste. I love Argentinian literature, I love Selva Almada, and I love this book in particular. The Wind That Lays Waste is about men and masculinity, but it's also about religion and the cult-like mentality of not only being religious, but not being religious as well. It tells the tale of two men. One is a traveling priest who is driving along through the countryside with his daughter. Their car breaks down and they push it to a garage. The garage is run by this aggressive middle-aged man and his apprentice, a young boy. And the novel is very Waiting for Godot. It's pretty much just a series of conversations between these two men, a priest and an atheist, while they discuss faith, organized religion, raising their wards, and it escalates to a very, very aggressive point, a very dramatic and gothic end point. And all the while, the two wards, the daughter and the apprentice, are enjoying the other perspective and are getting more and more interested in what the other man has to say. In part, this is about toxic masculinity, and it's also about the ways in which our beliefs and our obsessions twist and gnarl us into something very unhealthy. I love this book so much. You can read it in a day. Please check it out. This one feels like cheating in a way, but whatever. This is Solo Dance by Lee Kotomi. Now, this novel was translated from Japanese into English by my friend Arthur Morris. I've already mentioned a Japanese novel, but Lee Kotomi is in fact a Taiwanese author who writes in both Mandarin Chinese and Japanese. She lives in Japan now, and our protagonist is, like her, a young Taiwanese woman who has moved to Japan. So, it's a Japanese novel, but it's also very much a Taiwanese novel. And Lee Kotomi herself actually translated the book back into Mandarin when it was published in Taiwan. So I'm counting this as a Taiwanese novel. I also just want to mention it because this book meant a lot to me. This is a lesbian novel about a young woman with severe mental health issues who romanticizes suicide and the authors that she reads who all eventually committed suicide. But it's a novel full of hope. That's what's so important about it. It's a queer novel. It's a novel about mental health and mental illness. But it's also primarily about how we maintain hope amongst all of this, amongst homophobia and abuse and bigotry, amongst all of the mental health issues that so many of us come up against when we're at our very lowest points. I read this novel when I was the most depressed I've ever been in my life, and it really, really helped me. It really felt like a comfort, like a hand on my shoulder. Our protagonist, while she was living in Taiwan, while she was at university, suffered a horrific attack. And since living in Japan and working for a company there, she lives in fear of being discovered as a lesbian. And so she hides herself in plain view while reading and romanticizing suicidal authors. But as the book goes on, the people she meets, the places she goes, the things she sees and does, they give her hope and faith in her own life and her own abilities and her own strength. And I think Solo Dance is a very beautiful, moving, and important novel for anyone who is queer and or struggles with their mental health. Next up is an Icelandic novel, Magma by Þóra Hjörleifsdóttir, translated from Icelandic into English by Meg Matic. This is another wonderful feminist novel that hits really, really hard. It's about toxic relationships and abuse, and the ways in which toxicity in relationships can emerge and betray itself. Our protagonist is a young woman who has entered into a toxic relationship with a man. She is not a wholly likable person. You feel very frustrated by her actions, her cowardice, her fear, but you, of course, mostly sympathize and worry. And it's a novel that just explores how toxicity works within a relationship, why people don't leave, the excuses that they make to themselves and the people around them. It looks at the nature of toxicity and abuse and why it happens, who it happens to, how it happens, all sorts of questions and ideas. It's a very, very short novel that you can read in a day, and it's not easy. It'll be very triggering for some people. If you can handle it, if you can stomach it, It's a very worthwhile reading experience. Next up is a Swedish novel. Depending on where you are, this novel has two different names. In the UK, it was published as Faculty of Dreams, while in the US, it was called Valerie, a Novel. It's written by Sara Stridsberg and translated from Swedish by Deborah Bregan-Turner. And it tells the fictional narrative, fictionalized biography of the very real woman, very famous woman, Valerie Solanas, the woman who attempted to murder Andy Warhol. That's what she's remembered for. That's her legacy. And this novel attempts to reframe that a little bit and shine a light on who exactly Valerie Solanas was. I think these days the people who do know who she was know a little bit more about her than just she shot Andy Warhol. We know a little bit about her aggressive feminism. We know a little bit about the way that she viewed the world. We know a little bit more about her abusive childhood and the things that she went through as an adult and how she died very tragically. This novel covers all of that. And I found it very, very alluring, very addictive. Sara Stridsberg does a wonderful job of bringing to life the very real life of a woman. And that seems like a simple thing, but so often historical figures, especially women, are defined by specific moments, specific acts. And this novel just reminds you that people live entire lives from their birth till their death. They live a life. They do a lot of things. And there are a lot of things that they do, think, experience, believe that lead them to the thing that they are then remembered for. And I think Valerie Solanas is a great example of that. And Faculty of Dreams is a wonderful novel that explores the idea of a life and what it leads to and what society does to us. Next up is one of my favourite Korean books. It is a short story collection by Bora Chung called Cursed Bunny, which I've talked about a lot. It was translated by my friend Anton Her, who did a wonderful job. Cursed Bunny is a curious collection of stories, many of which are inspired by folklore. If not directly by specific folk tales, then at least the format and method of telling fairy tales, the tropes of fairy tale writing. But most of the stories in here explore different genres. You'll have body horror, you'll have a ghost story, you'll have a fantasy tale, there is a sci-fi story in here. I think there's more horror than not, but it is not explicitly about horror. And even when it is, each horror story in here is a different kind of horror, and I really appreciate that. Cursed Bunny is a very unpleasant book in a lot of ways, but it has fun with that unpleasantness. There's a lot of grossness here. A lot of scatological things, a lot of weirdness that is so much fun, and has a really strong injection of personality and humanity. Even the creepiest and weirdest moments in here feel very human, like they are happening to people. And so the book does ask you for a lot of sympathy. These stories also, I think, are just so expressive and imaginative. Bora Chung is an incredible woman with an amazing imagination. Next is one of my favourite French novels, The Collection by Nina Legere. This was translated from the French by Laura Francis, and it is a very curious little novel that kind of upset a lot of people. It is the story of a strange French woman who walks around Paris, taking men back to various hotel rooms, sleeping with them, but her main focus is that she wants to mentally record the image, the shape, the texture, every detail of their penis. That's her kink, that's her hobby, that's what she loves to do. It's a very wonderful book that explores the nature and notion of kink and the ways in which we choose to live our lives, spend our time, have our hobbies, all of these things. I love The Collection. I think it's a very eclectic and strange little novel that I really want more people to read. If you're into kink, if you have particular kinks of your own, if you want to see how slightly more bizarre people than you live their lives, really check out The Collection. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I had so much fun reading this book. Next up is a short story collection from Arabic by the Palestinian author Nuruz Karmout. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And it was translated from the Arabic by Perween Richards, who did a really splendid job with this. The Sea Cloak is a short story collection about the lives of Palestinian people today. It's a story that explores a lot of different character types. You have children in here, you have women, you have groups of people, and you have just the day-to-day lives and how they spend them. There's viscera in here. There's a lot of heart and humanity. There's struggle. But of all the books on this list, this is one that perhaps opens up a door between you and a very specific cultural moment. Literature in translation does not exist to teach people outside of that language and culture about that language and culture. That is not their focus. If you write a novel in English, you are not trying to teach French speakers something about your country and culture. So it's very, very arrogant of us to think that the same is true the other way around. That said, as an English speaker, as a resident of the UK who has never even met a Palestinian person, I truly felt like I was being given a window into these people's lives and what is happening to them, and just how they live day to day in a very ordinary sense. I found this so impactful and powerful. I really, really recommend The Sea Cloak. And finally, I want to recommend a book from Indonesia called The Wandering. This is by Intan Paramaditha, and it was translated by Stephen Epstein from the Indonesian. This is a very, very fun and strange and bizarre novel. It is a pretty big and thick thing, but it's an adventure novel. Just like the choose-your-own-adventure books of old, it is a book that asks you to follow the protagonist's journey and periodically choose a direction for them to go in, and then you have to turn to the page that it specifies. It's an adventure novel. And you can read through it pretty quickly and follow different avenues, and there are dozens of different endings. It's told in the second person, you. You are a woman from Jakarta. You are an English teacher, and you have just met the devil. And you have chosen to strap the devil down to your bed and have your way with him for a little while. And then eventually he gives you a pair of Dorothy shoes, a pair of magical slippers that allow you to travel. The first place that you go to is New York. You are suddenly in a taxi on the way from JFK into New York City, but you also have a ticket that will take you to Berlin. And now you have to decide where you go and what you do from here. It's a really, really, really fun novel that looks at language and migration and travel, human rights. It digs into a lot of big themes, and it allows you to make different choices and see how those outcomes would affect you if you were in this specific woman's shoes. It's absolutely fascinating, and not enough people talk about it. I loved The Wandering. I think it's a very, very, very smart novel that you really should check out. Intan Paramaditha is an amazing writer, very imaginative. Her short stories are also brilliant, and I can't recommend her enough. Okay, those were 13 books in translation from 13 different countries. There are obviously so many more out there. I've read books from the Netherlands, where I am right now, Norway, Germany, Spain and Portugal, and that's just Europe. I could go on and on and on, obviously. I've picked these 13. There you go. Enjoy. But please, please do your own research. Look through our website, look through my YouTube channel, and find the best works of literature from women in translation that will tickle your fancy. Spend August reading women in translation. Have some fun with it. If any of these books have sparked your interest, go get them, go read them, get them from the library, whatever. But also do your own research and let me know, what are your favorite books by women in translation? Let's spread the word, let's get lots of people reading for WITMonth, and subscribe for books.